Yo, I'm Josh from the Nomad Yoga family. This is
Zeb from Yoga Factory Pittsburgh and Zeb Yoga.
Zeb Yoga. We're hanging out here with Onyx, the yoga dog, and we were just talking about, and we thought we wanted to share with the crew as well, like all you guys. We are into hot yoga because right now it's, spring, but it's still snowing here in Pittsburgh. I'm from Canada originally, where it's freezing all the time. So heat just makes sense. But besides that, I feel like hot yoga is a term that's only used in Western culture, and it's much bigger than just turning up the dial. There's more to it. It means something different. So
absolutely.
So what is hot yoga? Both in like what we consider to be hot yoga in the media in the Western culture, and like where it comes from and what it really is. Like, why is it different?
Well, I think first and foremost, like yoga in general has been outsourced from India, which, it's pretty hot, pretty humid in a lot of parts of
Right.
India. There's a couple mountain ranges there as well.
It's just called yoga in India.
It's pretty much, yeah. Like if you're doing yoga in India, unless you're in the air conditioning, it's pretty hot.
Right.
And I think originally a lot of the thought behind it came from that. Like doing yoga in a cold environment isn't really conducive to your body opening, to getting oxygen in, to stretching muscles and ligaments, and it's the heat in the room is really designed to assist the body in opening, getting more flexible and healing.
Right, and then I've read as well. It's interesting to me because my understanding now in the physiology and the effect of heat in the body, there's these other modalities that appear to be quite different that are based on a similar principle. So like, there's like those crypto chambers, where people get really cold.
Yes.
And then come out, and it's the same idea kind of in reverse. They're to like constrict the flow in the body so that when you come out, there's a rush of flow. Whereas when you're in a heated yoga environment, you're getting warm so that flow in the body on all sorts of levels, like synovial fluid, but especially blood flow, oxygen flow, is heightened, it's easier. And then you're manipulating the body to promote that flow into like the deepest recesses of the body.
Yeah.
So in my mind, it's like you're feeding the body on the cellular level in a compressed amount of time. And it's not that regular yoga outside of a hot room doesn't do that. It's just that you have to do a lot of vigorous movement to create the same level of heat to be able to create that. So if you're like me, like stiff and old sports injuries and stuff when I started especially, it's not really an option to do enough of the vigorous breathing and special, maneuvering to get that warm that you're really getting that maximum therapy.
Right. And there was a really interesting point hidden in what you just said. A lot of the point of yoga in general and hot yoga specifically isn't to get more flexible. A lot of people come in and they're like, well, I don't know if I'm flexible enough to do yoga. And
Right.
That's really not the idea. As you practice yoga over time, you definitely get more flexible. It's one of the side effects, but it's a side effect of you getting healthier, your body starting to reorganize itself, all your internal organs actually functioning better, your spine starting to move. There's a lot to getting in there, moving your body that we don't even really think about on a day-to-day basis.
Right, and I feel like, so my dad teaches yoga as well, not hot yoga. He was like not really into it, actually. Now I think he appreciates for what it is, now that I'm into it. But we always have the discussion that all yoga uses heat. Like heat's a really normal sort of therapy tool and facilitator. It's how it's created that's the big difference. So,
well, if you think about it, life in general is heat.
Right.
Requires heat.
Right. So then, okay, so if someone, I know a lot of people that are watching this are just going to say, I don't like heat. Like, I don't do well in heat. I get heat stroke. I don't go out in the sun. I never go to Mexico. You know,
Yeah.
I sit in my AC in the summer. What about those people? Like, what do you say to them about coming into a heated environment and then doing exercise, really?
It can be challenging. I think for anybody that's daring enough to walk into a hot yoga room, it's going to be challenging, especially the first couple times. But another key aspect of yoga is just starting to be mindful of yourself, the way you treat yourself. And that's any yoga practice, not just hot yoga. You start to notice yourself as you do things. And, when you're just starting out in your practice, you're not going to be great at it.
Right.
Just like anything else that you do. Like a doctor or a rocket scientist doesn't just walk in on their first day and be like, hey, I'm going to design the next rocket that goes to Mars or whatever. Anything takes practice. So when you walk in to take your first yoga class, you can't expect to be great at it. When you go into a hot room for the first time, you can't expect to feel like it's not hot in the room.
Right. You have to acclimate.
You do.
You have to acclimate to the
And that
environment.
takes at least a couple times, if not more. But the benefits that you notice are almost instantaneous. After even a class or two, you start to notice that you have more energy, that you have more focus, that you sleep better, for instance. I mean,
Right.
there are lists and lists and lists of benefits and testimonials from people that have changed their lives just from starting a yoga practice.
Right. And I feel like, one of the things that I find comical about it, not like actually comical, like I make fun of anyone or anything, but just the same people, because I was one of them, that's why I'm saying this, the same people that are the most nervous about going into the heat are probably the ones that would benefit from it the most.
Yes.
Because the people who, if you're one of the people like me, I was highly affected by heat. I used to get heat stroke when I was a kid. I just never thought that I dealt very well with heat. And then when I first started a hot yoga practice, I wasn't in, the best shape of my life. So that amplification that you get from being in that environment really pushed some buttons for me. But there was nothing else that got me into a state where I could start to really work internally in my body in a positive way to create what I wanted. So that's like the oxymoron of the whole thing. I don't do well with heat, I'm not going to do it, but it's like the exact thing that you need to do to help yourself.
Absolutely.
Or like the flexibility. It's like, I'm not flexible, so I'm not going to do yoga. It's like saying, I'm so dirty, I'm not going to take a bath.
Yeah. One of the interesting things, a lot of new people come in and they are really nervous about taking their first class. And they'll go in there and, maybe they have to sit down for a minute. Maybe they have to take a break. Our culture, our society, we grow up with this idea of, we have to push ourselves when we exercise.
Right.
If we're not killing it, then we didn't have a good workout.
Right, that it's some sort of failure if you would have to take a break,
right,
sort of thing.
Right.
And that's literally the opposite of doing a yoga practice.
Right.
So
and I think that's one of the hardest lessons to learn for anybody when they start practicing, just that you don't have to do that it's okay just to be where you are at that moment in time.
Right, and then come back tomorrow.
Right.
So can you comment on that? If there were 3 things that you would tell a brand new student who's a little nervous about the heat, they're coming in for their first class, generally, whether in or out of the class, if there were 3 things you had to pick, you tell them to help them succeed, what would you say?
The first thing I'd say is to take it easy on yourself. To sit down, take a break if you need to, and to just have fun. No pressure.
Right. Right. So give yourself a break. Physically take it easy as well, and try to actually just enjoy the environment.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Which can be a challenge.
Yeah. And I would echo those things. The other thing that I would say too, it's we talk about this all the time in our culture, that you've got to do something a few times. I think that we're wising up to that this is the truth, but this is one of those things that I couldn't possibly make that point say that point is more important. Like, you can't go in and do one hot yoga class and then claim that you have any idea about it at all. Because my first class, I don't even know what happened in my first class. I know we did some breathing and then I laid down a little bit. and like, just because nothing negative happened, but just there's a lot of information and you're trying to acclimate to the room and when do we do this and what's this posture and whatever else. So it's like, even after 10 classes, you have a way better indication of how it's going to be. But then again, after 20 classes and then after 50 classes, it's like a whole new world all of a sudden for what's going on. And that doesn't really matter what style you're doing either. Like, whether you're doing like because at the studio you have like a restore class, it's kind of chill, or you have the 26-2 like traditional hot yoga class. There's even the vinyasa class, which is not usually in the heated room.
Correct.
But it's in the small room, so it gets hot because you're like a bunch of people in there. So, but it doesn't matter which style we're talking about, it's the same thing. It's like you have to do multiples of the class within a certain time frame. Yeah. Like, I don't know. In 3 months, you want to just like commit for 3 months and just kind of go for it.
I think that's the hardest, not the hardest part, but it's tricky for a new student. They come in and take a class and maybe they don't do as well as they thought they were going to. So they get discouraged, they get intimidated, or, maybe they felt a little dizzy or something in the class. And so they're like, I don't know if that's good for me. I'm not going to try that again.
Right.
So they make a judgment call on one class. Or, even worse, they've heard something from a friend of theirs.
Right.
Or they've read something online, and so they just make a judgment call without ever even coming in to take a class.
Don't even try it, yeah.
Right.
Man, I experience that lots. All the time, if people say, like, do you practice yoga? Yes, I practice yoga. What kind of yoga do you do? I do hot yoga. And it's one or the other. They're either like, I practice hot yoga too, I love it. Or, I can't do that, it's crazy, you're not supposed to practice in the heat. Like, they have all these opinions. I'm like, well, have you ever done it? Well, no. Or I took one class one time 10 years ago. Like, so it's a very opinionated thing. So you definitely have to try it. So then for people who don't, because I mean, the word yoga is a funny word in our culture, but basically what we're talking about in this context is physical yoga postures, which are stretching postures. And they're good for the body because you gain strength, you gain flexibility, they affect the internal organs, they affect the spine, which is the neurology of the body, which is what's very unique in my opinion, because it's a very holistic approach and it's trying to create health in the body versus fitness, which is great and you can be very fit, but runners are a really good example. You can be really fit as a runner and have a really crappy low back and bum knees. Whereas if you're a yogi, generally you don't have those sort of ailments. So it's the fitness versus health conversation, and yoga is definitely on the health side. Anyways, when someone's thinking about different types of yoga, because now there's a lot, like Pittsburgh has, I don't know how many studios are, there's a whole bunch of studios.
There's a lot.
If you were to go to a hot yoga versus a not hot yoga, what is there like a fundamental difference right out of the gate that you would, other than the heat, that most people could expect?
I'd say there's several. Most styles of yoga that aren't hot yoga rely more on movement to build heat in the body. So they generally tend to be a little bit more athletic. You're jumping around, you're flowing through a yoga class.
Right.
Which is wonderful. And you're really connecting to your breath, ideally, as well. So you're building heat in the body. You're bringing oxygen in, which is the same really fundamental concept as the hot yoga.
Right.
To do it, you're moving a little bit more.
Right.
And that's one of the basic differences between the two. In a hot yoga class, in general, you do a posture and then you hold the posture in stillness.
Right. You're focusing on the isometric contraction and the sort of the static hold of the posture.
Right.
Right. That makes sense. I mean, I really like practicing at your guys' studio. That's what I like, is that both exist. So you can feel like, I want to do a more athletic sort of flowing yoga class if that's safe for your body to do and it's available. Or you can do hot yoga, which is still super intense. That's the thing, is that it still has the intensity level the same as like a fitness jumping around thing, but you're just not moving as fast.
Right.
So it's a different repercussion on the body. It's not very like jarring,
Mm-hmm.
I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you were commenting the other day too that the history of yoga is kind of fascinating. So without going way into that rabbit hole, it's like hot yoga comes from its own lineage, and I think that's unique because I think most yoga comes from one lineage and hot yoga comes from the other lineage, and there's kind of only the two. So a little bit of the philosophy of approach is dictated because of that, because there's like these two trains of thought that have been prevalent in India for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Can you comment on that?
Sure. So if you're practicing a vinyasa style class, vinyasa is an offshoot of Ashtanga yoga, which, you know, the creator of Ashtanga, Pantabi Joyce, was a student of Krishnamacharyan, and, you know, the lineage goes back ages, but the concepts come from the Yoga Sutras, which were a set of books, a set of writings that were written in India thousands of years ago. And there's sort of like the 8-limbed path of yoga that they follow, and a lot of it is focusing the mind, meditation, yoga asana, the actual postures are one small part of that whole 8-limbed path.
Right.
And eventually you're working your way up to meditation and concentration, and eventually sort of this idea of enlightenment, samadhi. And that's great. The lineage that the hot yoga comes from, Vishnu Ghosh and Yogananda and all of their teachers before them, the main writing that they followed was a book called the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, which, if you look it up and you find it in a bookstore, it's really a pretty small book. It's only 100 pages or so. And it's a lot of, you know, just teachings of how to practice yoga and kriya, which are sort of mantra meditations. But the main difference with the Pradipika is that the main teaching in it is do the postures, practice the yoga asana, and all the other stuff will start to make sense to you. All the other stuff will come, as opposed to starting with all the other stuff before that. Like, I'm going to be spiritual, I'm going to meditate, I'm going to become enlightened, and I'll do a couple yoga postures on top of it.
Right.
Because the idea is to really focus, open up the body so you can find stillness, and in that you'll start to focus the mind, and everything else will come from there.
Comes from there. So it's I mean, to sum up what you're saying, it's like it's more experientially based. Like, the idea is you just go through this experience and allow it to take place in the time frame that's for you.
Right.
Or whatever's relevant for you, sort of thing, versus this is the path and study these things and then start to work on them.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I find it interesting because it's all the ideas, you know, a different angle to the same equation, so to speak.
Right.
But I think it's an important differentiator because even in the way a class is taught is quite different. You know, whereas in a vinyasa class, it's more common that there's sort of a lead to the class and you learn through just listening and whatever. In hot yoga class,
over your shoulder, like, what's going on
right
now?
And like checking it out, and you know, which is fine. And some people actually learn well that way.
Yes.
But for me, I think I probably resonated originally with hot yoga class because it has a high level of detailed instruction, so you know exactly, specifically what the objective is you're trying to do. Mm-hmm. So as a beginner especially, it makes sense because you don't, I mean, as a beginner, I can remember that it only took me a couple classes and I kind of didn't feel like an idiot. Like I knew what we were doing, and I could hear the teacher say, like, move your left arm, you know, stretch your left arm forward. And the class is then doing that. So how far your left arm goes forward, that's relative to your body, but you're all doing, you knew you were doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. Whereas the first time I ever did like a complicated vinyasa, I think I walked into like an intermediate vinyasa by accident or something. I had no idea what was going on. I was like, they're like, okay, now this posture. And I'm like, I've never heard of that before. Now what?
Right.
And you have to literally stop and like watch for a minute. So,
Right.
so just a little different approach sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that you mentioned that I think also comes up for people is that, you know, yoga appears to be, and there's so much stuff too. Oh, low battery. Let me just see. I think we're good. Okay, we'll see. Low battery. This is the last question then. One of the things that comes up is that yoga is religious in some way. That like if you practice yoga, it's blasphemy against your own religion perhaps.
Right.
I don't subscribe to that belief because I feel like yoga actually enhances your own personal beliefs, whatever those are. But the question is yoga itself inherently religious? If you practice yoga, are you practicing something that is religious? And can you be religious? Like, can you be Christian or Catholic or whatever you want to be and practice yoga? Or is that against the rules?
Is that taboo?
Right. Are you breaking the rules somewhere? You
Right.
know?
Yeah. You know, there's nothing inherently religious in a yoga practice, especially an asana practice. If you're practicing the postures themselves, just to get the health benefit from it.
Right.
Absolutely. You open up your body, you focus your mind, and you're building a better awareness of yourself, physically, mentally, energetically. Is it a path to become a little bit more spiritual? Absolutely. Do some people take it down a road where they're like learning about the Hindu roots of some of the stories in ancient yoga culture? Absolutely. But is it inherently religious? No. You can be of any religion and still practice yoga and not be indoctrinated into something crazy.
The dog.
Dog
Dog's
attack.
chasing a cat now, yeah. Right, okay. I mean, because I feel like that's a question, there's like a few questions that people sometimes ask that don't always get so easily answered.
Right.
So the religion one is one of them.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I think that people that are coming into class and they maybe haven't practiced before, or they haven't ever done like at a yoga studio done a practice, they might not understand how to be in the environment. So I feel like there's some questions that people don't want to ask that they're embarrassed about. So one of them is like really simple stuff. What if you fart in class? Like, what if someone farts in class? What happens? Does anyone even know? I mean,
I mean, who hasn't farted in class?
Right. Okay.
It's just something that, I mean, you're moving your body, you're shifting through all the crazy internal organs. Like at some point, it's going to happen.
The hard-hitting questions we're getting to.
Right. Yeah. And honestly, it's just like everything else that happens, all the crazy things that happen in a yoga class. Sometimes you fall out of a posture or whatever. Everybody is so focused on themselves in that moment, they're not thinking about you.
Right.
It could be deathly embarrassing, but really the person next to you on their mat is so concentrated on what they're doing.
They probably don't even know. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's actually true. I mean, I experienced that. I don't really know who's around. Like, I mean, I know from before and after class if you're practicing next to me, I know you're there. But during the class, doesn't matter to me really.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think it was Roger Shree or someone said this one time, but it's the idea of if you're on an airplane and you lose cabin pressure and the little mask drops down, they always tell you, put your own mask on first and then help the person next to you.
Right.
I feel like that really is like a yoga philosophy, that kind of idea that you're going in there and you might be in a class setting in a group, but it is a personal practice.
Mm-hmm.
So two people side by side, they're in their own little world. You're in your own kind of bubble and you're just sharing the energy of the class because let's be honest too, we could do yoga in the living room here, and there's no way it's going to be the same quality. It's like you can do yoga on YouTube all day long, but there's no chance it's going to be as beneficial to you,
right,
as if you go to your yoga class,
right,
in the beginning
and
at least.
Why is that? Like you bring up a really good point. A yoga practice is intensely personal, but I've also had people come into the studio over the years that are like, well, I know my own practice and I'm not going to listen to you. And it's a balance, because you're coming into a studio where there's a group of people and there's an instructor and there's a structure to a class. So while it is your own class and while you're experiencing it's absolutely your own experience while you're in there, you have to be aware of your surroundings. You're still in the structure of a class. You're still in the energy of a room.
Right.
And, they've done studies now that group intent, the energy, the power of a group that's working on a task together is much more powerful than if it's just one person by themselves.
Right, and I think people inherently know that. I think, when in anything you do, when you're in a group, it's not the same. It's the crowd mentality too.
Mm-hmm.
Like you get hyped up when you're in the crowd. So being in a class adds an element that is otherwise hard to achieve when you're by yourself. And perhaps you can get to the point where you have a personal practice that you can still maintain an intensity level that's that
Sure.
high. But for me,
it's difficult.
I'm way more motivated when I go to a class.
Yeah.
Especially a class, actually, this is against what I think. People think they don't want to be in a busy class. For me, those are the most fun classes.
Yep.
Like if I'm in a room and there's 50 people in there, which isn't that often that you're in a 50-person yoga class, but if you're in a room with 50 other people, you just like get caught up in the wave of, all right, we're doing this posture, and your brain just turns off and you just do your practice.
Right.
And so for me, I like those classes. I want it to be busy. I want to be in a group.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so then the other thing that people would probably say, we kind of talked about flexibility already. We talked about religion a little bit and spirituality. We talked about like bodily function. Just when you go in, you might not be able to do a posture or not, and you might think, I don't look good, or I'm sweating too much, or I farted, but no one's going to notice that stuff. It doesn't really matter. So what else? What would another reason why? What do you think is something that prohibits someone from coming to do a yoga practice?
That's a good question. I mean, so often you hear, I'm not flexible enough, or they're a little bit intimidated by the heat.
Mm-hmm.
Or, they've heard something from a friend of theirs, and, it's the word of mouth, like it can either really turn someone on or completely turn them off to starting a yoga practice.
It's like playing telephone with the kids. You say, Mary has a pink dress, and it comes out, aliens ate my dog, on the other end of the...
Right, and oftentimes the yoga teachers end up being the aliens.
Right. Well, there you go. So, yeah, okay. I mean, that makes sense. I think one of the things that I hear when I'm just talking to friends or whatever, and when we're traveling and practicing at different places, is people are scared to come in because I think that they actually know that they inherently understand that something's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just comment that they're right. Something is going to happen. I mean, like, that's the thing, is that it really does drive change. It really affects the body on a deep level. It affects the mind on a deep level. And it's not so extreme like you're in any risk or anything negative will happen. So I say this lightly, but you do kind of need to be ready for it. And I feel like some people, they would never be able to say this, but they're just not. Like, not everyone's like, okay, I'm going to start and really give a yoga practice a real shot for a little while. Let's make it easy. Like, for 1 month, I'm going to come in and I'm going to practice just 2 days a week. So 8 classes in a month, which is really not a big thing to do. But when you do that, you're going to go through a process. So you have to want to go through that. And if you really don't, then you'll probably find every excuse possible to not.
Right. I tell people all the time when they're first starting their practice, one of the only things that you have to be to succeed at yoga is willing.
Right.
You have to be willing to try.
Right.
And you have to be willing to make a change.
Right. Yeah, and to that comment too, I think that one of the things that that you really notice as well with the yoga practice is just that you can't escape yourself once you're in your practice. So it's not like the teachers don't do anything. Hot yoga has a rep from a past era or something where like the teachers are kind of really hardcore, or we're gonna like make sure that you did stuff.
Right.
I've never experienced that in a negative way ever, so I really don't know why it's like that. But they're motivational and say like, hey, keep going, you're doing great. And at your studio, everyone's like super positive. But what I would say is that might, what am I trying to say? When you practice, you can't escape yourself. Like you can sit down at any time. You can take a break. You can just not do a yoga posture.
Right.
Or you can be in a yoga posture and it's getting very sensational and you just decide it's enough for me. And sometimes that's what you should do. But I feel like what's interesting about that is that you end up knowing for yourself, did I do what was the most beneficial for myself right now? And you can't escape that reality, that truth.
That can be really hard for people.
And that's super hard because when I'm feeling like a little, I don't know, not super pumped on myself or whatever, it's not about half-assing it in the class because I know I can't escape that. So when I'm there, I always do something good. I'll try to find an excuse not to go to the class in the first place.
Right.
Like,
right.
I'm
Once
on the way,
there, you're good.
Whoops, or I ate too close, or I'm not hydrated, or someone said, let's go have a beer instead, know? So
right.
you like look for that external excuse.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like that's a little bit unique to a yoga practice, especially a hot yoga practice, because whatever's going on is like amplified and you feel it.
Right.
Whereas, I don't know, I feel like I could have just eaten a cheeseburger and had a beer, and if someone's like, I dare you to come for a 5-kilometer run with me, it would probably not be comfortable, but I could do it. It wouldn't, it wouldn't be so mentally stressful for me.
Yeah.
So like there's this weird internal mental battle, let's say, that is a little bit inherent to a yoga practice.
Yes.
And I feel like, I don't know what you think, but I feel like it's unique to that. I don't feel like it occurs in the same way in other things.
Yeah. A yoga practice is a little bit beyond just normal exercise because you really do have to be present. You really do have to work on
that's what it is.
Your mind as well. It's not just working on your body. Like you're really all there.
Right.
When you're balancing on one leg, you can't be thinking about, your laundry list or, what to buy for dinner for the next week. Like, you have to be present. You have to notice yourself while you're doing it. And
I've never thought of it that way. It's so true that you have to be present. Because if you are balancing on one foot and you think of something else, you fall over.
You fall out.
And it's over. Whereas, I don't know, I can lift weights and be thinking about anything. I can be running, and most of the time I'm running, my mind is often who knows where it is. So.
And you asked earlier, what are the differences between hot yoga and other styles of yoga? And I think the way that a hot yoga class is set up, with the heat in the room, and generally there are big mirrors that you're looking into the whole class, and that's it. They're bright lights, so it's you looking at yourself in a mirror for the duration of a class and noticing those things about yourself. Did I work hard? Did I go to my edge? Could I have done something more and all those things are challenging.
Right.
You're constantly being aware of yourself in the room as you're taking the class, as you're practicing.
Right. And I think, we've kind of covered this a little bit too, but what you've just highlighted, all the things you just highlighted are internal things.
Yes. Yeah.
Nothing is external from yourself.
Right.
I mean, it blows my mind even to this day, like the cardiovascular output, for example, you do stick posture or whatever, and you come up and like, it feels like you've just been sprinting, you literally held still on a 2x6 mat for 30 seconds. That's it. You didn't even move, racing. And your heart is racing. So like, there's this real internal effect going on, and it's an internal battle in the mind too. That so there's no like external forces applied to you.
Right. Yeah.
You know, you don't need a weight or a bungee or a strap or a pulley or a whatever else.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. A lot of other, like a vinyasa class, for instance, and not knocking vinyasa, I love my practice, but you know, there's extra factors. There's a playlist, and you're sort of like moving and flowing through the whole thing, and it's a little bit more rare that you actually hold still in a posture for any amount of time.
Right.
So you sort of remove a little bit of that challenge.
Right.
When you don't have to focus on yourself as much because there are distractions.
Right. Well, but the only thing I would say about that, and just the Nomad Yoga family, when you guys look it up, like we've been traveling for over 2 years. We've been to over 100 yoga schools in the last year or whatever alone. We've taken classes all over the place, taken all different styles of classes. It's been really fascinating. And you really, with vinyasa specifically, and this is maybe part of the difference too, I'm answering my own question, hot yoga versus like not hot and something like a vinyasa class. The vinyasa class is way more based on the teacher.
Right.
So the teachers that are really good, that went to like a real teacher training, that actually took some actual time, and they actually have studied, and they've actually practiced, and they have a mentor and whatever else. Like when I took Lori's class here, it's a different experience than, because nowadays to become a yoga teacher, I mean, just that title itself doesn't inherently mean anything. Right. So it's more teacher based, because the good teachers do still allow for what you're talking about.
Right.
Yes, there's a flow. Yes, there's music. Yes, there's everything else. But they create space during the time you're in the class to make sure that you get an opportunity to really go inside as well. So that's how, like, within just that one style, even there can be quite a big differential.
Definitely.
Whereas with hot yoga, I feel like it's structured in a way, it could be a brand new teacher or a veteran teacher, and that's kind of built into the system a little bit more. So that's kind of a fundamental difference.
Right.
Okay, well, we're just talking forever. We're going to wrap this up. You guys who are curious about yoga and hot yoga, I definitely say come and check out the Yoga Factory. These guys know what's going on. Zeb is actually, he's very modest, but he was an international yoga champion as well, which is just, he does yoga demonstration. So he has gone from, you describe yourself as like, you know, a stiff soccer player, runner,
right, guy. Long distance runner, soccer player, dabbled with weights in the gym for a long time. So when I walked into my first yoga class, I was just sort of like, you want me to do what now?
Right.
And it took me a long time to sort of build up my flexibility and start to accomplish some of these postures. And then I heard about this yoga competition, and I was like, what is that? You know, it sort of, it spoke a little bit to my more competitive side, for sure. I grew up doing sports and all kinds of stuff like that. But again, like, there's this aspect of yoga that it's so internal. And the first time I got on stage and actually competed in a competition, I started to realize that even though it's called a yoga competition, you're not competing against the other people that are on stage.
Well, because how can you even?
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The battle, the actual competition is internal. When you're on a stage under bright lights in front of an audience of people and a couple of judges, it puts your practice under a magnifying glass. And in class, a lot of times you'll hear a teacher talk about being in the present moment. And when you're on stage like that, all of a sudden you start to understand like what that really is. Like,
right. Because you have to shut out.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And it's a 3-minute demonstration on stage. And while you're up there, it feels like an eternity. You're like, can't this thing just stop? Can't, you know, like, right. I feel like I've been here forever. And the minute it's over and you walk off stage, you're like, what just happened? Like it all goes by so quickly.
Yeah.
You have to be in complete control of your breath, your adrenals. Like you start to really be able to control your bodily systems. And that's the idea of a hatha yoga practice, to be able to slow everything down, to just focus the mind. You hear all these stories about ancient yogis that could like slow down their heart rate, so if you actually tried to take their pulse, you wouldn't catch one.
Couldn't catch the
like
pulse,
they could be buried alive.
Right. These weird tricks they could
like
do.
superpowers.
Superpowers.
Almost.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's what I'm training for. Like I want to be able to levitate someday.
Levitation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No kidding.
Or
Fly.
teleport. Yeah, fly. Why not?
Yeah. I like it. But I mean, what I think is really interesting too is just perspective. So just because you meet a lot of yogis, because yoga is so prevalent too, they're like ex-professional dancers, and they've kind of, they've started at a really different place than where maybe you've started. So being like a stiff, dude, and then going through and like having your body change and learning these sort of skills over a decade of time is a cool perspective, and then also I think brings a unique flavor to your teaching approach as well with the people that are in front of you, and then from you through the staff as well. So I've had a really positive experience with that, because I relate to that as well. I'm still feel like I've definitely gained a ton more range of motion, a lot more health in my body, but I still am like not a naturally flexible person,
And that's the fascinating part about it. Even as you start to get better at your practice, it doesn't end. There's always somewhere else to go. There's always more to discover.
Right. Yeah, at first it's like a weird concept because it's outside of our sort of North American mind.
Right.
You can't,
I want to
there's no like
this
check,
thing.
I did it, and now you move on to something else. Like it never ends. There's always more that you gain from it positively. So
that's the fascinating part about it.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Post your comments down below. What are we nuts? What's happening with hot yoga? What do you think about hot yoga? Have you tried hot yoga? When are you coming in to take Zeb's class at the Yoga Factory? Check out Zeb Yoga, Nomad Yoga Family, and share this with all your peeps around here. We'll talk to you guys next time. Peace.